All right, so today we're going to take a close look at a recent segment from Fox News. But we're not just looking at the headlines. We're going to really dig in and see how the argument itself is actually built. What makes it tick, what makes it convincing, and how the whole thing really stands on one single emotional idea. Let's get into it. Okay, so everything we're about to unpack really starts right here with this one powerful claim. The argument isn't just that bad things happen because of certain policies. No, the argument is that causing pain is actually the goal. This is the emotional core, and you'll see how the entire case is built up from this foundation. So the big question is, how do you get from a statement like that to a complete, structured argument? Well, that's what we're going to trace out. Think of it like following breadcrumbs. We'll go from this core theory about why opponents do what they do to the specific examples used as proof, and all the way to the final, really hard-hitting conclusion. First things first, the segment doesn't just jump into events. Before it gets into the what, it lays out a theory for the why. It kind of sets up a philosophical lens for us to look through, one that frames the whole conversation around people's motives and what they intend to do. Now, to back up this theory of intent, the segment brings up a pretty famous idea, Occam's razor. You've probably heard of it. It's the principle that, hey, the simplest explanation is usually the right one, and this becomes the main tool used here to cut through all the noise and get to what the segment argues is the real motive. And here is exactly how Occam's razor gets used in the argument. It goes something like this. If you take away all the complicated political talk and economic reasons for a policy, and that policy causes hardship, what's the simplest reason left? Well, according to the source, the simplest reason is that they meant to cause that hardship. Malicious intent. So you've got this theory of malicious intent locked in, but a theory needs evidence, right? The first big piece of proof the segment offers up is the political battle over a government shutdown. The shutdown gets framed as a huge contradiction. How can a political party say the government is a force for good and then turn around and use that same government as a weapon against the people? The segment argues that this isn't an accident. It's the whole point. It's a deliberate choice to make people hurt, and it draws a direct line to a previous shutdown over healthcare as another example of the same thing. And to really hammer this point home, the segment points to an article and what it calls an actual quote to say, look, this isn't just our interpretation. The claim is that causing pain is a stated goal, and that people are actually enjoying it. This is a tactic that makes the political argument feel much more personal. All right, from the idea of weaponizing government, the argument pivots, and it shifts to another incredibly charged topic. That theme of intentional harm now gets connected directly to the border, creating a link between immigration policy and violent crime. And this is where the big, abstract argument gets very specific, very real, and very tragic. It focuses in on one specific murder case. This is a really powerful way to make an argument, right? You take these distant policy debates and you make them feel immediate and devastating by tying them to a single, emotional human story. Now this is a classic and very smart rhetorical move. The speaker knows what the counter-argument is probably going to be, the one about crime rate statistics. So they get out ahead of it. They do that by changing the definition of crime altogether. The rebuttal says the crime rate is 100% because the very act of crossing the border illegally is the crime. Okay, so if you reframe the very act of being in the country as a crime, that leads you to the next logical step in the argument, and maybe the most powerful piece of it all, the idea that any other crime that follows is totally preventable. The whole argument here really boils down to this one number, 0. The position is that the only number of murders that's acceptable from people who are in the country illegally is 0. Why? Because in this framing, their presence itself is preventable, which means anything they do is also preventable. And here's how that logic is laid out, step by step. 1. Illegal entry is a crime. 2. That means the person shouldn't be here in the first place. And 3. Therefore, any crime that person commits later is 100% preventable, and the blame for that rests with the policy that allowed them in. See? It's a very clean, very direct line of reasoning. So this all leads us to the grand finale, the closing argument. All the points we've talked about, the malicious intent, the weaponized government, the preventable crime, they're all pulled together now to make a direct comparison between two different presidential administrations. This table pretty much sums up the entire conclusion of this segment. On one side, you've got what's described as a really simple approach. Shut down the border, arrested bad guys. And the claim result of that, the safest America in recorded history. On the other side, the implied argument is that different policies, open border policies, have directly led to these preventable tragedies. And this quote just captures the whole feeling of that final point perfectly. The solution is presented as just simple, obvious, not some kind of complex rocket science. The argument is that the success of the first approach is all the proof you need that it works. And that's where we land. What we've just walked through is the construction of a very powerful, very straightforward story. It starts with bad intentions, leads to harmful actions, and ends with tragic results. By boiling down these incredibly complex issues to a simple matter of cause and effect, the argument becomes super clear, super easy to follow. Which leaves us with one final question to think about. When an issue is framed this simply, what do we gain in clarity? And what might we be leaving out of the picture?